Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
This is an Islamic call for prayers. It happens 5 times a day, every day, in so many corners in all over the world. Maybe we are familiar with Buddhism, Christianity, but what did you know about Islam? What is the first word in your mind when you heard the word Islam? Terrorism, conflict, or aggressive? It's all stereotype about this interesting religion. Now, let's make your journey to discover this mysterious religion through some basic information about Islam, the history of Islam, Islamic creed, Islamic society, and the culture of Islam. In the final part, let's take a look on Islam today. By the way, we are Trung and Wataru.
There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. This is a sentence expressing the most basic Islamic holy creed. Islam, according to Arabic, means submission and adherence to the religion called Muslims, meaning those who submit to God. In Islam, we call God Allah. Islam is the youngest among the world's major religions, but Islam started in the 7th century. It is also one of the largest, with more than 1.8 million adherents, the second largest religion in the world, and the number of Muslims is growing, so it may catch with Christianity in the near future. It is divided into the Sunnis and Shia. 85% of Muslims are Sunnis, while the Shia makes up between 10 and 14% of all Muslims. Islam is the dominant religion in many of the developing nations in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, such as UAE, Egypt, and Indonesia. Green countries here belong to Islam. You can clearly see how much power Islam has on Middle East and Asia. Islam also has its own restrictions. Muslims are not allowed to eat pork, which is considered the most unclean of all meats. Dogs are also considered unclean and can be kept only for the purpose of guarding. Muslims are forbidden to drink wine, use drugs, and gamble as well. These factors formulate their characteristic and make Islam become one of the most interesting and important religions. For Muslims, Islam has been from the beginning much more than what is usually meant by the Western concept of religion. Islam is not only a religious faith and sets of rituals, but it also sets patterns, order of society in matters such as family life and even personal hygiene. In some countries like UAE, Islam acts as a role of a constitution, which means everyone there has to follow the rules.
Now, let's be with us on a time machine and discover the long story about the history of Islam. Because Islam is one of the youngest of the world religions, the details of the life of its founder are more valuable. Born roughly around 570, Muhammad was from a family of the tribe Mecca. However, his father died before he was born, and his mother died before he was 6 years old. So, the orphan child was raised by his uncle, Abu Talib, the chief of the tribe. There was no chance for him to receive any kind of formal education. However, the development of trading in Mecca allowed the young Muhammad to work with the caravans, the people who travel across deserts for trading. This gave him a great opportunity to approach the different representatives of the religions and cultures in the Middle East. Each of these religions has several things in common and must have influenced on Muhammad. Those years working in caravans also gave Muhammad the chance to meet the woman who later became his wife, Khadija, a wealthy widow and also the owner of the caravan. In the years following his marriage, Muhammad began to go into the hills surrounding Mecca to ponder the fate of his people. During these periods of meditation, at the age of 40, he received a visit from an angel and began seeing visions and revelations from God. Visions came to him in his sleep. Muhammad memorized the contents of these messages and taught them to his companions. Eventually, they were committed to writing to become the scriptures of Islam, called the Quran. In 619, Muhammad suffered the loss of his two strongest supporters, his uncle and his wife. His uncle death left him without protection from his tribe and had to seek refuge. Muhammad tried to move out of Mecca to a nearby town, but he was resisted and had to return. After failing to find a new home for his followers in a nearby area, he eventually reached an agreement with the delegation of Yarif, or later we call Medina. They were impressed with his honesty, his sense of justice, and the power of his personality. They gave him an invitation to become the ruler of the city, where the residents were in political chaos. So in 622, at the age of 52, Muhammad and his followers made the journey. This migration was called Hijrah. Muhammad quickly became a successful leader and statesman. He also took on city a new name, Medina, the city of the Prophet. Within the short period of 10 years, Muhammad, the religious leader of a small band of emigrants, rose to become the political leader of all Central and Western Arabia. In the 10 years after his migration, he made the final announcement at the Kaaba. Today I have completed my religion for you, and I have fulfilled the extent of my mission. I have left you the book of Allah and clear commandment. If you keep them, you will never go wrong. Shortly thereafter, reporting several heartbreaks, he died at the age of 62. His life is assumed to be all devoted to God.
After Muhammad's death, the political and spiritual leadership of the majority of Muslims was assumed by a concession of caliphs. At first, the caliphs were friends of Muhammad and acted as leaders of faith. They were chosen by election and there were broad agreement. The first 4 caliphs were selected from the circle of friends of the Prophet and ruled from Arabia, including Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. However, in later years, the caliphs became inherited and the system was more authoritarian. Between 661 and 750, Islam was ruled by the Umayyad dynasty. Umayyads were more interested in ruling as kings, in conquering territory, and in sharing treasure from wars rather than being leaders of a religious community. The caliphate was next held by the Abbasid dynasty. The Abbasids did better than the previous dynasty, which bring Islam to the peak of its civilization. At that time, Jews, Christians, and Muslims worked together in studying and preserving the texts of the Greeks, philosophers, and scientists. After the 10th century, however, the golden age of Muslim civilization began to decline, and the caliphate began to lose its power. The Abbasids were replaced by the Ottoman Empire. When Ottoman was dissolved after World War I in 1924, the caliphate was abolished by the Turkish National Assembly, inheritors of the Ottoman Empire.
We can say that Islam appeared and developed at exactly the right time in history for expansion. It came at a time when the Arab people were ready for a unifying force, when the Byzantine Empire in the Middle East were on the verge of collapse from internal corruption, and when the Persian Empire was also vulnerable. Within a century of the death of the Prophet Muhammad, the religion of Islam had become the unifying force for Arabs. Muslim armies conquered Palestine, Persia, and Egypt, and across North Africa into Spain. In the following centuries, the Islam spread throughout the Middle East and moved into India, China, and Southeast Asia. Before the death of Muhammad, Islam had begun to conquer and unite the Arabian Peninsula. After the death of the Prophet, the movement gathered and moved outside of Arabia. Damascus was taken in 635, Persia fell by 636, Jerusalem became Muslim in 638, the Byzantine and Egypt was taken in 640. In the following decades, Islam strengthened its victories. Most of North Africa became Muslim by the end of the 7th century. In 711, the Muslims entered Spain. In 732, they were turned back from further conquest in Europe, but the expansion began to slow down. In the 11th century, the caliphs extended their conquest into India and China. In the 15th century, most of Indonesia and Malaysia was converted to Islam.
Almost all the Islamic creed was derived from one book, the Quran. It is the scripture of Islam written in Arabic. This word Quran literally means reading or recitation, indicating the basic belief Muslims hold about this book. That is a recitation written in heaven and revealed to Muhammad. He played a role as a loudspeaker for Allah. This book is divided into 114 chapters called surahs, with the phrase "In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate." Perhaps no scripture has ever been so influential to its people as the Quran. Some countries, such as Saudi Arabia, UAE, regards the Quran as the ruler of the whole country. Recitation of the Quran is an important ritual act and the source of Allah's blessing. The first things Muhammad heard when they were born are selected from this book. It is also the source of their education and became a textbook for the study of Arabic. And its words are often the last words Muhammad heard before death. This is the most powerful book with all Muslims.
Those things that one must do to be a good Muslim are to practice the 5 pillars of Islam. The first one is called Shahada, which is the declaration of faith. This is the most common religious act of the Muslim. They have to repeat the start of this statement in Arabic. There's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. The second one is called Salat. Salat is an Islamic daily prayer. The Muslim is expected to pray 5 times a day: dawn, midday, mid-afternoon, sunset, and nightfall. Before praying, they must clean themselves. Muhammad decreed Friday to be a special day of Muslim worship. It is the only day of the week when Muslim is required to pray at a mosque, a building for Islamic religious activities and worship.
Third is Zakah, the practice of charitable giving based on accumulated wealth. Muslims are expected to share their positions with the poor, widows, and orphans. They also can support religious institutions, scholars, and students. Charity is obligatory according to Islamic law and is assessed as a tax amounting to between 2.5 and 10% of one's wealth. Next is Psalm or fasting. Each year during the month of Ramadan, Muslims are expected to avoid all food, drink, smoking, and sexual relations during the daylight hours. The meaning of this pillar is to remember the month when the Prophet Muhammad first received his revelation. The only Muslims don't have to practice this fast are the sick, travelers, mothers, nursing infants, and small children. The last one is Hajj. This is a pilgrimage to Mecca. It played an important role in the early history of Islam, and it is mentioned in the Quran as a ritual duty. The Prophet Muhammad purged the Kaaba of its idols and reestablished it as a monument dedicated to the one God. Every Muslim who can afford a trip should make the pilgrimage to Mecca once in his or her lifetime. Kaaba means a cube in Arabic. They make 7 trips around the Kaaba and kiss the sacred book stone. Surprisingly, the inside of its Kaaba is completely empty, no things. In Islam, idol worship is forbidden, so they cannot pray for something object. They just need to pray for God.
Now, let's look inside in Islamic society. According to Islamic principles, all of us are equal in the eye of Allah, and trading is a crucial element contributed to the prosperity of the state. This made Arab society used to be considered one of the most equal societies, just in the past. Because the development of trade, the merchants enjoy a degree of respect that they did not receive in Europe, China, or India. However, slavery was still widespread. Because a Muslim could not be enslaved, the supply came from Africa or non-Islamic population in Asia. Most slavers were employed in the army or domestic servants, including sexual slavery. The slaves who worked in the land estates experienced the worst living conditions. Another drawback of Islamic principle of human inequality, like most other societies of Islam, is in the treatment with women. Although the Quran instructed men to treat women with respect, the male was dominant in Muslim society. A man was allowed to marry many wives, and if a Muslim wished to divorce his wife, it was an easy process compared to modern Western methods. When the husband said, "I divorce you 3 times," the divorce was final. And Islam custom required that women stay at home and prohibited from social contact with males outside their own family.
During the centuries following the rise of the Arabic Empire, it preserves and spread his scientific and philosophical achievements of ancient civilization. At the time when ancient Greek philosophy was still unknown in Europe, works of many famous Aristotle plays were translated into Arabic and many Muslim scholars read and studied on them. Although Islamic scholars are praised for preserving much of classical knowledge for the West, they also made considerable advances of their own, especially in mathematics and the natural sciences. Astronomy and medicine also get important achievements from Muslim scholars.
In terms of literature, the Islam literature reflects many distinct cultures of the region. Muslims regard the Quran as their greatest work, but pre-Islamic traditions continue to influence many writers. The most famous works of the Middle Eastern literatures are the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam and the very well-known work with us, Tales from 1001 Nights, also called the Arabian Nights. It's likely to remind you about so many bedtime stories like Alibaba and 40 Tips. All of these wonderful stories belong to Islamic civilization. However, ironically, these two works are not as popular with people in the Middle East. Regarding to Islamic art and architecture, the art of Islam is a mixture of Arab, Turkish, and Persian traditions. Islamic calligraphy is also used for decoration in construction. The ultimate expression of Islamic art began in the late 7th century. The first great example is the Dome of the Rock, built to proclaim the spiritual and political legitimacy of the new religion to the ancient world. Although it was rebuilt several times, the first monument to Islam represents the birth of the new art, with thousands of these copies in all over the world.
These days, the number of terrorism occurring in the world is increasing compared to the last century because of conflicts not only with outsiders and Muslims, but also with insiders Sunni and Shias. Last century, we faced so many wars in the world, but now, instead of wars, we are facing numerous big terrorism. When it comes to terrorism, there's no way around the fact that most of big incidents happen have a relation with ISIS. ISIS stands for Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. All members from this group believe in Islam since the beginning in 2013. They caused a number of terrible incidents over 5 years. As I mentioned, these members believe in Islam just like an ordinary Islamic people. Quran says killing people without any reason and committing suicide is what Islamic must not. They must cherish their life given from the God Allah. So why does ISIS kill people without reason and cause terrorism despite the fact that they are not supposed to do so? They personally and originally understand the Quran. Quran says if there's people who combat against you, you combat for the Allah, but don't combat aggressively. Allah doesn't love aggressive person. In fact, they must combat in order to save their own lives, not trying to kill people. They think they need to kill people for Allah. Another reason is that they want to bring Islam to the golden age again, which was when Caliphate ruled the empire. They want to spread their own territory by killing people. Of course, most Islamic people don't think that way, so make sure to know that this group is completely different from ordinary Islamic people. We don't need to share the same opinions with others, but we need to be respectful.
That brings us to the end of our journey to discover Islam. We hope that we brought you guys useful knowledge about this religion. Islam itself is not terrorism. The difference in our religions, our beliefs, our personalities cannot deny the fact that we are all human and we all want to live in the world with peace and love. Thank you for listening.